Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, December 22nd, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about the state of New Mexico and their brand new congressional map, in which the Democratic Party drew this map solely for themselves in an effort to gerrymander the map into a point where there are 3 Democratic districts and 0 Republican districts. Now, as the map stands currently, these are the most recent House election results in the state of New Mexico. The Democratic Party handedly won the 3rd district and the 1st district, while losing the 2nd district by a margin of about 6 points, 7 points with an incumbent Democrat. And with this incumbent, even though the Democrats were able to win control of the United States Senate and win the popular vote in the House elections by a margin of 3.1%, ultimately the 2nd district was too Republican for the Democrat to overcome, and only narrowly went to Democrats in the first place back in 2018 by a margin of less than 2%. So knowing that the Democratic Party had just recently won that 2nd district and had a possibility of winning there, the Democratic Party decided that there is a possibility for 3 Democrats to be in the state of New Mexico. And for a long period of time, throughout the entirety of the 2010s, the state of New Mexico has had a consistent Republican hold in that one district, up until 2018, when the entire delegation became all Democrats. And then the Democratic Party in New Mexico got a taste of victory, and consequently wanted to replicate that for the next 10 years. And they could do so simply due to the fact that New Mexico alone is drawn solely by Democrats. So there is no type of Republican input in this finalized map, and ultimately it is a map that is drawn very clearly for the intention of going all towards the Democratic Party. And you can see this right here. Now, this is the old map and this is the new map, and we'll talk about some of the major differences, because the Democratic Party might have actually done what we would call a dummy-mander. Now, this is an effort that is done by an incumbent party to gerrymander a map to ensure victories over the next 10 years. But it's called a dummy-mander because the map itself might ultimately be their downfall in future elections, and most importantly, and soon to come, the 2022 midterm elections. Because you can see the clear difference between the old map and the new map, there is a lot more blank space here, indicating that these 2 surrounding districts outside of the 1st district are considered to be toss-ups. And that's simply because they have been split up so much through the cities and rural areas of New Mexico that these congressional districts are now considered to be toss-ups, whereas previously they were very solid for the Democratic Party. You can see how the difference here really takes effect. And we'll talk about the change in districts, and actually they are renaming the 2 congressional districts. The current district with the Republican incumbent is the 2nd congressional district. Now that one, they did not flip it. It just seems to be on different ends of the map itself, with the 1st congressional district being moved down into this region. They aren't renaming them. I made a mistake to point that out. But what they are doing is essentially drawing it in a way that they are covering different portions of the state. You can see this one goes a lot further down in an effort, I think, to capture some of these rural votes and tie them into Santa Fe, a very Democratic area, to make the district have a partisan lean that is favorable for Democrats, while also cutting out enough of the rural population that this 2nd congressional district is now a Democratic lean district. But even though they are lean, these margins are nothing to be solid about. That's why FiveThirtyEight characterizes them as lean, tilt, toss-up, whatever you want to call it, districts, because they are within 5%. And that is super noteworthy, because the Democratic Party has drawn a map that is not solid in any way. I mean, even the 1st district is only Democrat plus 11. You can see the very dramatic differences from what they used to be. Let's take a look. So on the old map, the 3rd congressional district was Democrat plus 14. Now the 3rd congressional district is simply Democrat plus 5. That is a 9-point reduction for the Democratic Party. In the neighboring 1st congressional district, the Democrats went from Democrats being in the advantage with the partisan lean of 18 points to the left of the national average. Now it only leans 11 points to the left, which is a 7-point decrease for the Democratic Party. So you can already see how in these 2 initial districts, the Democratic Party is seeing a massive reduction in support. But it's all to counteract, because New Mexico can only be drawn in a certain number of ways, it's all to counteract this now newly formed 2nd district that is ultimately shifting towards the left, towards the Democratic Party, by a margin of 18 points. What was once Republican plus 14 is now Democrat plus 4 to try to make it more difficult for the incumbent Republican to win in this congressional district. But again, there is this topic and idea that this actually might end up being a dummy-mander. And it is referenced in a way simply due to the fact that this map could be potentially won by all Republicans. And that's why you start to see the questions rise, even if it isn't won by all Republicans, because admittedly, it will be difficult for the GOP to win that first district no matter how well the national environment ends up for them. Ultimately, though, I wouldn't say it's outside of the realm of possibility, because on the older map, the Republican Party lost this second district in 2018 despite it being 14 points more Republican than the rest of the nation. And knowing this, the new map puts the Democrats just 11 points more Democratic in the most Democratic district in New Mexico, which means that if Republicans can replicate a 2018 style victory, which is probably going to be more difficult considering that the GOP is going to have a much tougher time winning about 8 points nationally speaking, just based off of their hindrance in the national popular vote. They simply don't have enough voters. But if they were to replicate it, that means that the first district could potentially be won over. And that's why we call this a dummy-mander. That's why we call this potentially a complete mishap and mistake put forth by the New Mexico Democratic Party. Because now, even in a normal year, the Democratic Party would be technically narrowly holding on to this second district and this third district. And to be fair, in a normal year, the Democratic delegation would be 3 Democrats and 0 Republicans, meaning there would be an advantage for the Democrats and a gain ultimately altogether. But again, that needs to be cautioned by the fact that our election years never really end up being normal. And if the GOP just has any type of narrow advantage on the national map, 2 of these seats could instantaneously be gone for the Democratic Party, giving the GOP 2 out of the 3 in total. Because under the old map, while there wasn't as easy of a possibility of this second congressional district going blue, the Democrats knew consistently they would always have 2 solid districts. The Republican Party was never able to capture either of these 2 districts since they have been drawn, even in years like 2016, where the election went decisively to the GOP. They won control of the House of Representatives, retained it, won control of the United States Senate, retained it from their 2014 victory, and won the presidential election. In the state of New Mexico, Hillary Clinton had an 8-point victory across the state, but ultimately, looking at these 2 districts, they didn't falter much. In fact, the Democratic Party did better than they did in some of their 2018 performances across these districts. Even in 2014, a year that was arguably much worse for the Democratic Party, and the worst year on record for Democrats in the 21st century in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate, you can see here that the state of New Mexico still elected 2 Democrats to the House of Representatives, and this second district just went solidly for the GOP. But that's pretty much it. The district went solidly. And it's another thing to point out that the second congressional district, despite it being at that point in time having a Republican lean of plus 14 across the nation, this second district voted for the Republican incumbent by a margin of 29 percentage points. So when you know that the R plus 14 translated to a 29-point victory for the GOP in 2014, that tells you about what some of these victories were in the past and what they might be in the future in some of these more competitive districts, potentially even in the first congressional district. So Democrats definitely seem to have dropped the ball with this map, and to be fair, there probably wasn't much they could have done. Congressional maps are very difficult to draw, and when you have very few districts and very few cities to crack, it becomes hard to gerrymander. And that's what you ended up with here. The Democratic Party really had no other alternative besides sticking with their older map. But some people might say, come 2022, Democrats will inevitably regret this new map that they have drawn. But then again, for the long-term effects, the Democratic Party is in the advantage in all 3 of the districts, which means that everything else permitting, New Mexico will consistently have 3 Democrats elected to the House of Representatives, even if this means that momentarily the Democratic Party will lose control. But the factor of the incumbency is a very powerful thing, as the 2014 election can show you. In a district that is just as half of Republican as it ended up being in this election, it sometimes can surmount partisan advantages for the incumbent party, or in this case, the opposition party. Even if Democrats may have a significant electoral advantage in a district, if an incumbent is popular enough, they will survive. the 10 years and wait for the census to be drawn in a way where potentially the state is under new leadership. And ultimately, New Mexico could be a red state at that point in time if things end up in a different type of reality. Things don't seem to be on track that way right now, but I don't think that Republicans in the beginning of 2010 would have at all expected that Georgia, Arizona, and Texas would either be swing states or Democratic states with 2 Democratic senators. And these are things that you need to keep in consideration and consider when evaluating your new congressional map. Is there the possibility that this map makes it so Republicans take the advantage, hold out for 10 years, and then end up winning control of the governor's mansion or the state legislature in the future, and the vicious cycle repeats? We don't know. And that's why this map was so dangerously drawn. It's drawn in a way to benefit Democrats, but it could truly end up backfiring. And I am super enticed to see what the final result will be, because it is entirely possible that Democrats use this map effectively in 2022 and are able to survive what is expecting to be a red wave. And if they do that, it will be on the backs of this new map that was drawn by the state legislature by and for Democrats. And that's the reality of the world that we're living in. The true test of the gerrymandered map will be put into full effect in the 2022 midterm elections, because those elections are likely going to be one of the most brutal the Democrats will experience over the next 10 years. Simply based off of our national circumstance and historical precedent, we shall see what happens. And when you take a look at New Mexico relative to the rest of the nation, it seems to be following suit with what many other states are going to do. I actually mentioned the state of New Mexico when I covered the state of Nevada for this exact reason, because the state of Nevada was split up in a way that allowed the Republican Party in a good year to win 3 out of the 4 districts, including 2022. That means that this could actually be a dummy-mander. Because on the old map, what this did was at least ensure that there was one solid Democratic district. And it still had Democrats in other districts, but even in this new map, potentially speaking, the GOP could have an advantage of 4-0. Because this new district, or this 4th district with an incumbent Democrat, is not considered to be safe. It's not a solid district by any means. It only has a partisan lean of Democrat +5. That means that because it has a partisan lean of Democrat +5, that it can only be considered a lean state or lean district advantage for the Democratic Party. So with these 2 outside districts that have narrow Democratic advantages, the Democratic Party is in a position now where they could potentially lose this 4th district, lose the 3rd district, and lose the 1st, while the Republicans win the 2nd and bring a 4-0 delegation for the Republican Party in the state of Nevada for United States Congress if 2022 ends up their way. And it reminds me a lot of what happened in 2018. Between 2016, the Republican Party had 3-1, a 3-1 advantage in the state of Iowa. By the end of 2018, Democrats completely flipped it. But there was actually a district here that was much worse for the GOP than they could have at least anticipated earlier on in the year. Looking at the 2 districts that flipped, the 1st and the 3rd, these were drawn districts in a way that could have been flipped. It sort of made sense. They defeated an incumbent twice over. You had the 3rd district and the 1st district, and the 3rd district actually ended up holding on for the Democratic Party in 2020 versus the 2nd district, which actually went to the GOP, surprisingly enough. Very fascinating if you ask me. But regardless, these PVIs were D+1, D+1, and R+1. And at that time, I would say that it made sense that these 3 districts went blue, given the national circumstance. But the 4th district, a district that nobody was expecting originally to even be competitive, ended up being decided by a margin of 3.4%. Steve King ended up being primaried because he said a lot of stuff that he shouldn't have, and there was a lot of things uncovered, a lot of scandals amidst his recandidacy in 2020. But the final point to be taken from this is that even that 4th congressional district became very narrow. And when you look at the margins of victory in recent elections, even in 2020, you will see that it went to the defeating challenger in the primary by nearly 30 points. So national circumstance can certainly override any other type of idea that a district won't be competitive. Districts can ultimately become extremely competitive in House elections if the national circumstance is right. And that gives the GOP an opportunity in states like Nevada under this new map to potentially win every single one of those seats into the United States House of Representatives, simply based off of a national environment, simply based off of where we are today. And that's just the harsh reality I would say, for the Democratic Party, looking at Nevada and also now looking at New Mexico, because this map also perfectly embodies what is wrong with a gerrymander that tries to make it so the entire state has a single party delegation. While it is likely in a normal type of election year, that's not what we are anticipating 2022 to be. And of course, it would be wrong and naive for the Democratic Party to simply consider one midterm election versus a long-term goal of Democrats in control for the next 10 years, to consider just one election when it comes down to how a map is drawn. And I don't know. I do not have ideas as to how this map could be drawn in a better way. There possibly isn't one. Maybe it makes sense that an entire state shouldn't be comprised of just one political party when the state itself is at most voting for a certain political party by 11 points over the other. That's just food for thought at this point in time. But of course, both political parties like to gerrymander. I end off all of my videos talking about this because it's the reality of our American political system, and it's something that we have to work with, and it's something that we have to report. So, looking at this New Mexico map, did Democrats make a big mistake? We'll find out in November of 2022. We will see how many Republicans are sent to the United States Congress as a result of this brand new map. It could be one, it could be two, it could be all three. Republicans have defied expectations before, as have Democrats, and we shall see what the final result is. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my redistricting election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.